Hello, I'm Sammy Woods, and today I'm going to be reading 3 scary stories from Reddit. The authors are linked below. Please go show them some love. I Remember Before I Was Born by AliasForWhom on Reddit. I wish I didn't remember. I was so much more, and I would assume you all were too. It was an endless peace, drifting, reveling, pondering, comprehending. Everything was mine. Until Mother came. I opened my copious eyes to perceive them. In an instant watched them crest over the horizon and stand before me. As they took in my features, a fluttering veil of melancholy drifted over their face, and they softly caressed my skin. "My child, it is time for you to enter the world." They scanned my multitude of eyes, windows to every beam of light traveling to me. "These won't fit. They must go." They settled on one gray eye and plunged their thumb into it. I screamed in pain as they worked that digit through the soft sclera, tearing the cornea and allowing the viscous humors to run down my face. I pleaded with them, begging. Why? What had I done wrong? What did they want? But Mother hushed me in a soothing tone. I felt the stalk holding my eyeball stretch and rip as they ripped it fully from my body. Then they moved on to another eye, and another, and another, and another, and another. I tried to shut my eyes to shield myself from the onslaught, but Mother was patient. They know what's right for you, and will do everything in their power to give it. So, as my muscles weakened, my lids twitched open, and Mother's grim work continued, racking my eye sockets with pain and patching my face with a shredded rainbow of irises. When I was left with unfathomable darkness, only 2 tiny specks of light, Mother cradled my weeping form. A moment of rest. It lasted so long, but not long enough. When my screams had become a memory, Mother next turned her attention to my ears. "My child," they said in a voice I heard without hearing, "these 2 will not fit. They must go." I whimpered powerlessly as they rounded my figure, taking in the waves and spirals of ears, each cupping vibrations of the universe. I uttered one prayer to them when they grabbed an ear like a sprout growing in a field. It takes very little force to tear an ear from your head, about 7 pounds. But the tubes, the drum, and those tiny bones, they are a different story. And so Mother's nails pinched deep into my skull, and I felt that assembly line of sound twitch with a blaring ring, and like a sprout, Mother yanked from my flesh that ear and the entire root. I heard it splat into the gathered humors that were once my eyes, and felt warm blood trickle from its excavation. And so they continued on with the rest of the field, pinching, plucking, piercing. The sound of the world slowly muted around me, following Mother's path like the hands of a clock, until they were satisfied and bloody clumps floated on a moat of red. And as before, they held me, and as before, I wept. Next to go were my hands and my feet. "My child, you must forgive me, but these 2 must go." With the cracking of bone and tearing of sinew and muscle, the space wherein I could move and the things which I could touch and change were taken from me. They were thrown into the ever-gathering mountains of flesh that used to be me. Following that were my countless noses and tongues. "My child, my child," all I could enjoy in scent and to taste, all the meaning I could create with maneuvering sound, it was ripped from my face with torrents of blood that choked me. After all this, Mother observed me and simply stated, "We are close," before carving the now superfluous swatches of skin and meat from my body with a sickening, rending, and slopping sound. The pain at this point was a constant white noise of agony to which I barely knew how to respond. This one tongue I was left with was alien to me, so I simply hung open my jaw and breathed. When they'd discarded all but enough to cover the small collection of bones and few remaining limbs of my diminutive form, they gave me the most pained look yet. My child, you've been so strong. I will now allow you to forget all of this. They left my line of sight once more, circling behind me. I had no speech, and no knowledge of how to move what remained of me to face them. Then I felt them grip the back of my skull with both hands and tear it open. I do not have words for the feeling of my consciousness being grabbed by the handful and severed and tossed aside. There's an electric pain, but also an electric numbness. Worse, I don't know if I can even imagine the things I thought or knew or wondered or believed that were taken away. Mother climbed into my gray matter, digging it out like it were a mine, but not to discover, only to remove. They climbed out, put a fragment of the pieces of my skull together, a passable but crude puzzle, and picked me up. I was so scarce now, I could rest in their arms, and they began to wade through the landscape, now towering mountains of limbs and bones and cartilage and sinew and fat and nails and teeth and hair and skin and organs, separated by a vast ocean of blood and bile and tears and acids and saliva and vitreous threaded with weaving veins and arteries, every last bit of which used to be me. Mother carried me across the world to a small transparent sack and gently placed me within it. It was warm and throbbing with life. There, now you fit. They gazed at me with unconditional love as this thin membrane grew over me and divided us. But they made a mistake. As far as I can tell, Mother works thoroughly in the case of every other living being I've ever come across who doesn't remember the agony of being torn apart to come to this world. But contrary to their promise, I remember. I believe they missed the part of my brain to make me forget, and I resent them for it. And I hope that when I die, I can meet Mother again. I hope we all can. Fish Eyes by Annie Marie Morgan. Before we were monkeys or even mammals, we were reptiles. Before that, we were slimy amphibians clawing our way up on land. And going back that far brings us to the common ancestor of all the tetrapods on land. It brings us back to the time when us and birds and deer and dogs were all the same creature. But before even that, we were fish. That was about 430 million years ago when those first bony fish started using their fins to support themselves on land. Looking at them now, you wouldn't think that we had very much in common. We've done away with the scales and the gills and fins, but those fins formed the bases for our arms and legs. And if you think about it, compared to the other life in the ocean, all of us land animals still have eyes and bilateral symmetry. We still have mouths and the same senses, though we've lost electroreception and our hearing is much different. One of the most obvious ways that evolution has left us with memories of our aquatic ancestry is in our eyes. I'm sure you all remember learning about refraction in middle school or elementary school. I'll give you a refresher just in case. Take a spoon and put it in a clear glass of water, and you'll see that it appears to bend at the barrier between the air and water. It's an optical illusion, one left over from when we all had fish eyes. See, our eyes evolved in the water, and they were made to either look underwater at more water, or up at the air from the water. Our eyes are not made to look into the water from the air, so there's a kind of glitch in the perception there, because we never developed the need to fix it. Our eyes worked fine enough to survive even with that glitch, so throughout all of our evolutionary history, we've kept that small reminder that we were not originally made to live on land. Now, with that background out of the way, the reason I'm telling you this is because there is something wrong with my eyes. I learned about refraction in school, and I learned that everyone else saw it, but I never did. If I put a spoon in water, or looked at my legs in a river, they look perfectly straight. I mentioned this to my doctor as a child, but he didn't believe me, so I've never really brought it up or thought about it much. I kind of thought in a self-important way that maybe my eyes had a mutation of some kind and left it at that. It was something I'd wonder about every once in a while, but I never really yearned for answers, and I never really thought that I would get them. It was just one of those things. Until last week, that is. I think I finally know what's going on, why my eyes are like this. I have some theories, but first I need to tell you about what happened. I'd never been to the ocean before. My buddy John has family out in Hawaii, and he was planning a trip out there to visit his great aunt. He invited me to go, and of course I accepted. It's Hawaii. I wasn't going to say no. The first day we had to ourselves, John took me on a hike so we could visit a less crowded part of the beach. We ended up finding a lovely little lagoon to hang out in, and decided to just swim and laze around. John is one of those people who always has crazy hypotheticals up his sleeve, or he's ready to plan in depth for what we could do in a zombie apocalypse, so I could easily spend all day just hanging out with him. We'd brought food and lots of sunscreen and decided we might just hang out at the lagoon all day. The water was perfect, and the bright sun shining through the leaves made those little patches of sparkly water in between the cool striped shadows from the trees. There were so many birds there, too, chirping and fluttering around. It was my first real experience in the ocean, and it was absolutely perfect. We were having a heated argument about what a human-centaur hybrid baby would look like when I first saw it. At first I thought it was the shadow of a bird flying overhead, and there was just a dark shape moving smoothly and quickly over the water, but a glance up showed nothing in the sky, though it looked like some of the smaller birds were taking off. I realized then that it was something in the water, and I immediately started worrying about sharks. I yelled, "John, there's something in the water!" Oh shit! He started swimming for shore, and we both scrambled up as the shadow grew closer. "It's right there," I said, pointing, though I'm sure that wasn't necessary. The thing looked huge, but it was kind of hard to tell what exactly it was. The water was rippling, distorting the image, but it looked almost like it was clear, like an enormous jellyfish, or maybe it was just a huge plastic bag and I was freaking out over nothing. But it moved so fast. It definitely seemed alive. It came to a stop right at the shore near us. "I don't see it," John said. "What do you mean it's right there?" I was getting agitated now. "Let's move back." We took a few steps back and the thing stilled. Then it began to change colors, and as it did, more of its form presented itself. The midsection became pale beige, and the upper bit grew dark. The bottom half was beige as well, but separated off into two distinct sections. It kind of looks like a body, John," I said. "I don't know what you're talking about. I don't see anything." I started to wonder if I was hallucinating. It had looked clear before, and now looked like the lifeless form of a woman with long dark hair floating in the shadows. Or perhaps it was a body and I just didn't see it right as it was floating over, because of the shadows from the trees overhead. I realized then, sort of passively, that the birds had stopped singing. In fact, a glance up showed that they had all fled. It was so quiet, aside from us. Something strange was happening. I took a few steps closer and made out the form more clearly as the water stilled around it. There were long, dark strands floating around the top of it like hair, and it appeared to have legs, though it was kind of hard to make out any feet or knees. They were just kind of tubes. I wondered if it had been decaying. I took a step closer, and John said nothing. I now know that he wasn't able to see what I could. The form was very still, and I started to wonder if maybe a shark had brought it over, intending to feed. Perhaps the shark had blended into the water more, but then fled, just leaving the body. It all had happened so fast, and I was panicking, so I couldn't be sure if I'd been seeing everything right. The form moved closer to shore, and I didn't shy away. Part of it peaked above the water near the middle, and I realized very quickly that I was looking at a woman's torso as two breasts rose above the surface. That made me step back. "It's a fucking body, John." "I still don't see anything, man." Then I realized that her skin still looked healthy. It still had some pink to it, and I wondered if she might not be dead after all. I'd have to try CPR. I stepped forward and put one foot into the water, reaching my arms under to grab her torso. She felt wrong, and I quickly decided she was probably dead and must be decaying. But there wasn't any kind of smell. Her back felt like there were lots of small, hard coils or ropes, rather than one solid mass of flesh, and alarm bells started sounding off in my head. I got a closer look at her face as she briefly rose up, and her eyes were just large blue dots on what looked like a smooth surface. I looked briefly at her mouth, trying to see if the rest of her face made sense, but before I could process that properly, one of her breasts lengthened and then uncoiled into two large tentacles, which wrapped around my arm. "What the fuck?" I screamed, as its hair reached up to grab me too. I now know that John had no idea what was going on. He couldn't see anything. But to his credit, he ran over. He grabbed me just as the hair wrapped around my legs, reaching up and grabbing my swim trunks as well. John pulled as hard as he could as the creature dug into me, pulling my face to the surface of the water. I got a quick look at its fleshy head then, and the red blob that made up its featureless mouth. Then it constricted like a snake, and spasmed, pulling my head underwater. It held me there briefly, but then loosened its hold. I jerked up and gasped for air, and saw blue liquid leaking out of one of its appendages. John had stabbed it with his pocket knife. He pulled the knife out, then stabbed it again and again, digging into my flesh as well, but I didn't care. Adrenaline was coursing through my veins, and I only cared about not getting dragged into the water. I realized John must have been looking at where my skin was being pressed inwards, because to him there was nothing there. I pointed to its awful face and said, "Here, John, get it here," and he stabbed blindly, just catching the edge of one of its strange eyes. I let it go then, and it sloughed into the water. John watched the splashing, but still couldn't seem to fixate on the creature. It left just as quickly as it had come, gliding into the open ocean. We didn't go into the ocean for the rest of the trip. I told John about what I'd seen in more detail, and he believed me. After all, he felt the thing grabbing me, even if it wasn't something his eyes could perceive. We talked about it a bit after that, trying to come up with theories. I told John about the strange thing my eyes do, how they don't seem to have any trouble looking into the water when human eyes are supposed to, and he agreed that perhaps it was because I had indeed lost that evolutionary glitch. We both quickly came to the conclusion that this creature may have been something that could camouflage from other sea life. Perhaps it could hide from the things descended from sea life as well, whose eyes had evolved underwater. We talked about the mermaid angle as well, and the resemblance it bore to that tale, but we couldn't figure out exactly what it meant. When I sat down to write all of this down, I realized the rather obvious theory that perhaps I'm not the first person to have eyes that are further away from our fish eyes. Maybe on ships and coastal communities there have been other people like me who've spotted the creatures, and that's where the legends came from. But this theory indicates some disturbing ideas. That those creatures are intelligent enough to realize when their camouflage isn't working and try something else. And more than that they have been doing this for a while. It wasn't mimicking me and John after all. It had presented as a woman, and maybe that was because throughout much of history it's been mostly men on the sea out fishing. But why go to the trouble of doing something so complex for just a handful of people? The complex strategy used for such an adaptation indicated a frightening level of intelligence. Perhaps it even spoke to a culture and history that these creatures possessed if they were passing an adaptation down to their young. I thought then of orca whales, how they'd kill sperm whales just to eat the tongues, or sharks for their livers. They do this because they're smart enough and deadly enough to be choosy, to only eat the best meat when it's available. Perhaps mutants like me taste better. That line of thinking brought me into the other traits that come along with intelligence as well. Kindness, but also cruelty for the sake of it. I thought again of orcas killing for sport, or house cats playing with their food, chewing off the legs of mice to watch them try to limp away. Then I thought of even darker possibilities, how sea otters will lure other animals into the water for their own sexual gratification, or how violent dolphins are towards not only each other, but other sea life when they're in heat. I wondered, then, why the beast I'd seen was hanging out near the shoreline when there are quite literally plenty of fish in the sea. Why did it seem to be going for humans, specifically? The legends of mermaids and sirens all talked about them using their looks to lure sailors into their doom. They were creatures who seduced humans for some reason, and I thought of the creature poking its fake breasts above the water like it was trying to entice me. I wondered if it planned on eating me, or maybe it had something else in mind. I don't know which fate sounds worse. I know one thing for sure, though. I am never fucking going in the ocean again, and if you're reading this, neither should you. I looked into the yellow eyes as I died, and now I can't get away. By Andy3103 on Reddit. When I was young, I thought that after you die, you either go to heaven or to hell. When I grew up, I started to believe that life is all there is, and when you die, you enter a state of nothingness. A sea of endless calm and inexistence. The same place we were all in before our births. I know better now. I'm 25 years old, and 7 years ago, I died for the first time. It was an accident, something that could have happened to anyone, but as luck would have it, it happened to me. I was crossing the street after carefully looking to my left and to my right, and after making sure that the street light was green. I'd had a few close calls before, and I didn't want to risk anything. I wonder now if they were close calls at all. It seems like I wasn't careful enough, because I wasn't even halfway through the crosswalk when a car hit me. I didn't die instantly. And even though the driver fled the scene before calling an ambulance, the street wasn't empty. After a few agonizing minutes that felt like hours, I was taken to the hospital. I remember hearing the doctor telling my parents that I wasn't going to make it through the night. I remember feeling fear and regret, but also calm, knowing that all of the pain was about to go away. I wasn't supposed to wake up, not even for a minute, but I opened my eyes for the last time at 2:25 a.m. I remember the glowing red numbers and the deafening noise of the machines hooked up to me. I looked around, unable to move, and at the same time wishing I could yell and make my mother know that I was awake. That's when I saw it, a hooded figure walking down the hall. Glowing yellow eyes illuminating the dark. It must have felt my gaze, and I think I saw surprise in those glowing orbs. I shouldn't have been able to see it, but I did. Is that the Grim Reaper? I remember thinking. Now I know that it wasn't. Oh, how I wish I could go back to those blissful moments of ignorance. The creature walked slowly towards me. I couldn't blink, even if I wanted to. The yellow glow was making me more and more dizzy, and the terror had taken my body captive. The odd thing is that the heart monitor hadn't picked up on my rapid pulse. A clawed hand reached towards me, and I wanted to yell. I wanted to escape, but I couldn't. I had a tube down my throat and at least 3 tubes in my veins. I don't think I could have escaped if I didn't either. My body was completely paralyzed. Before the clawed hand could touch my arm, I heard a loud beep, the sound of a heart monitor, letting people know that a heart had stopped. And all went to dark. The sound of my alarm woke me up the next morning. I was in my bed at home. At first, I thought that the previous day had been a nightmare, a horrible nightmare, and that the day had started anew. The hope of that vanished when I looked at the date. It was 1 day after my first death, and the part of my arm where the figure would have touched me if I hadn't died was red and sore. I wanted to forget it and to have a normal life. It was odd, but I didn't want to think about it too much. Somehow, I knew that those would be my last moments of calm. I went to university, and then I went home, careful of the outside world, trying not to die again. Soon the night came, and so did my insomnia. Someone was knocking on the door of my small apartment. The first few times I was startled, but when I looked through the peephole, there was no one on the other side of the door. The 10th time that I heard the knocking, I was ready to open the door half-knock and to catch the people that thought it was funny. I opened the door fast, careful not to hurt the person on the other side, but there was no one, and the knocking could still be heard after the door was opened. I felt a chill going through my body, the back of my head burning with someone's gaze. When I turned around, 2 glowing yellow orbs were staring back into my soul. I ran. I ran back into my apartment, into the kitchen. I locked the door, and then I ran towards the window. I could escape through there, But fate had other plans. The creature broke the lock and walked towards me. I'm not sure if it had a face or not. Everything was hidden under that hood. I tripped and fell down to the floor, the creature stretching its hand towards me. It touched my leg and agony filled my whole body. The spot where it touched me feeling like it was on fire. It started to drag me behind him. I didn't want to go with it, but I knew the destination wouldn't be exactly pleasing, but I didn't know what to do. That's when it hit me. I had to die. I reached for a knife, thanking my past self for being too lazy to pick up the knife that had fallen out of my hand earlier that day. I took a deep breath, preparing myself for what I was about to do, and I stabbed myself for what seemed to be 1,000 times. All went dark after a while, and suddenly it was 5 a.m. My breathing was fast, and my leg hurt. Once again, the spot where the creature touched me was red, but the one on my arm was completely gone. That was my second death. During the following days, I researched what had happened to me, and I stumbled across the concept of quantum immortality. Every day I woke up, and by the end of the day I had died at least once, always followed by the creature. Now I know that I'm jumping through universes every time I die. I've met more people like me. Some of them are haunted by a creature like the one I described, and some aren't. My theory is that it follows those that die looking into their eyes, and the people I've met seem to agree with me. It never follows anyone else, and I'm the only one able to see it, except for those that are haunted by them too. I once saw the creature that was following one of those people that I met, one of those that die every day, like me, to escape monsters. That night, the creature got what it wanted, and the guy that I met was dragged into a black hole. I've spent almost all day in this universe, and I know that my stalker creature is about to arrive. I'm scared, and I hope this ends one day, but hope is never enough. I write to warn those that are about to die. Do not look into the dark, and do not let them know that you see them. Maybe like that, you'll be able to have a new chance at life, and you won't need to survive. Goodbye, and good luck. Lauren, 25. Thank you for listening. Special thanks to AliasForWhom, Andy3103, and Annie Marie Morgan on Reddit. Please show some love to those authors, and I'll see you again next time.